the past few hundred years, the human population has expanded at an exponential rate. Now, the reasons for that exponential expansion is something we're going to talk about at a later video when we start talking about population ecology, and specifically we will talk about human population growth and some of its effects. But one of the consequences of that increased growth has been an expansion of human territory. I mean, that makes sense, right? If we have twice as many people, we need twice as much space in order to fit everyone in. However, it's not just the number of people. Our lifestyle has also been increasing over time. People today have more products that they need. They have more purchasing power, right? They need larger houses. They need bigger cars or better cars, or they need more devices with rare metals in them. Where does all that material come from? Metals have to be mined. Wood has to be cut down. Water has to be harvested from some location. So these two factors, the expanding population and also the increase in our lifestyle requirements, causes a great deal of expansion into natural habitats. So as we move into these natural habitats, as we fill in wetlands and clear out forests in order to fit more food production areas, or build more condos, or build more apartment complexes, or Walmarts, or whatever it might be, we start eliminating locations where natural habitats could potentially exist, and this threatens biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of organisms, the variety of life that you would find in a given area. Typically, if an area has high biodiversity, it's a healthy ecosystem, and if it has low biodiversity, it's an unhealthy ecosystem. And as the human population is expanding, we've only allowed those organisms that can deal with that expansion, the ones that can survive in a human-dominated world, to survive, and everything else starts to go extinct. We've seen a spike in the number of extinctions, and therefore globally, biodiversity is in decline. So we're losing out on biodiversity, and we're also losing what are called ecosystem services. What is an ecosystem service? An ecosystem service is an amenity that is provided to the human population because of a healthy ecosystem that, if that ecosystem were to disappear, the humans in that area would have to pay real money in order to make up for those services. So I'm not just talking about like ecosystems are pretty and we like to look at them, so that's nice to have around. I'm talking about real economic value that is tied up inside of our natural resources and inside of these healthy functioning ecosystems. So here at the bottom, you read this statistic, the average annual value, not just what's stored there, the average annual value of ecosystem services each year in the United States is more than $33 trillion. Okay, what kind of services am I talking about with ecosystem services? Well, fortunately, the U.S. Forest Service has actually published a chart for us to be able to use for specific types of ecosystems. So here's one for the U.S. forest ecosystems. What kind of services are provided to us in terms of billions of dollars annually? Now, cultural is the hardest one to quantify on this list. It comes in at somewhere just over $1 billion, and this is in terms of the value that certain cultures have associated with these healthy ecosystems. You could think of American Indian or Native American populations and their very strong cultural connection to the forests and the prairies and these kinds of lands, but also part of the American identity has to do with this being a land which is rich in natural resources, which has these beautiful large forests, these kind of expansive natural areas. So there's a lot of cultural value tied up in this as well for us. But like I said, that's kind of a hard one to put a dollar value on. So biological control is a little bit easier because you can compare areas where the forest has been clear cut to areas where it has not been in terms of pest control. See, there's a lot of predators out in natural ecosystems, things like spiders that you probably wouldn't want in your house, but having them in a forest near your house is actually quite beneficial. Now those pests are nasty inside of our houses, but they're really nasty when it comes to cropland. Think about how much money farmers spend on pesticides and other methods of control in order to try to keep down the populations of mice and stink bugs and all kinds of things. So to use stink bugs as an example, if you're not familiar, the brown marmorated stink bug is an invasive species in this area, and what it can do is stab its proboscis into things like apples, so it can show up in an orchard and stab all of these apples, and it secretes digestive enzymes into the flesh of that apple, which starts breaking it down, leaving these really nasty looking brown spots on the outside of the apple, and no one wants to buy that. So that crop becomes ruined as a result. Now, if you have an intact forest nearby, you're also going to have lots and lots of birds that are nesting in that area, and they're going to be swooping by your field, and they will pick up, they'll be swooping through your orchard, they'll pick up all of these stink bugs and eat them away for you. And every stink bug that you have eliminated by a natural predator is one that you don't have to spray pesticides on. So having a natural healthy ecosystem can actually reduce your costs in terms of purchasing other types of products, which could have their own problems, washing into waterways, pesticides washing into waterways, or potentially ending up in the food supply. So biological control is actually a pretty substantial ecosystem service provided by U.S. forests. In terms of soil production, it might sound weird, but soil is a very valuable resource. It's a very slowly renewable resource, and one of the big ways that soil gets made is leaf litter gets digested by decomposers, and we get new topsoil coming out of these forests. We are actually kind of running out of topsoil, as it turns out. We need to use more and more artificial fertilizers because there's not any of that good, dark, rich topsoil around. Now, it is being produced, it's a renewable resource, but like I say, it's a slowly renewable resource. So in terms of soil production, U.S. forests offer another $2.5 billion annually. Talking about materials, what do we build houses out of? Well, we build it out of wood. That's still one of the best building materials you can get. And where does that wood come from? Well, it comes from trees. Logging companies come through and cut these trees. Now, if they just clear cut and remove everything, we're going to use up all the trees pretty fast. But some companies actually log in a very sustainable, responsible way where they plant new trees for every tree that they are cutting down, and then they only grab a few trees from an area at a time. Now, it takes a little bit more money to do it that way, but that means that you're always going to have trees to keep getting materials, building materials from over time. So that, offering us building materials, is another ecosystem service that is offered by U.S. forests, and that comes in at around $5.5 billion annually. Recreation. Think about how much money it costs to buy camping equipment and kayaks and take these trips up to the mountains in order to do stuff. Think about how much money and time people spend because we love doing recreation activities in forests and in natural areas. Forests alone, recreation, it adds to the economy another $8 billion. This is no chump change here. This is real world dollars that people would not be spending if the forests did not exist. Talking about food coming out of forests in terms of game and other types of fruit and things that you can get out of a forest, that contributes another $11 billion annually. We could talk about waste treatment. Healthy ecosystems help purify water and air by pulling nutrients, excess nutrients out of the waterway. They pull a lot of toxic materials out of the water as well. So that means that we don't have to spend nearly as much money decontaminating materials in terms of waste treatment ourselves. Without the forests, we would have to build much, much more infrastructure in order to deal with wastewater treatment. But because we have these healthy ecosystems, we do not. How much does that get us a year? Not a whole lot, just about, $18 billion or so. And then another ecosystem service is in terms of climate regulation, because remember, plants are photosynthetic, and these forests are very, very large areas of plants. Every molecule of CO2 that a tree pulls out of the atmosphere is a molecule of CO2 that is not contributing to climate change. And climate change, as we will discuss later, is a really, really really big economic problem that we are going to have on the horizon. Climate change means that some areas are going to get more water damage than others. They're going to get higher amounts of precipitation. So you need to build more infrastructure to deal with that, more stormwater mitigation, for example. Some areas are going to be hotter, so we have to build things in order to deal with that, more air conditioning in certain areas, or other types of mitigation strategies. Or if you just want to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, maybe you have to build big machines to try to fix carbon, to try to suck it out of the atmosphere, and that costs a lot of R&D money and a lot of money to implement that kind of idea. So in terms of climate regulation, just the intact forests, that's getting us an additional $18 billion per year. Now again, what is that $18 billion? That is $18 billion in damage and mitigation costs that we do not have to spend as taxpayers because these forest ecosystems are still intact annually. So once I had a student ask me, who cares about the loss of biodiversity really? Isn't this just kind of hippie stuff, And what I try to communicate now is that no, we're not trying to save the planet just because we like all of this biodiversity, we like all these plants, we like all these animals. We absolutely do. But in addition to that, there are extremely good selfish reasons to want to preserve biodiversity and ecosystems. They save us money, and they can make us money in some situations as well.